In the quiet hours before dawn, as the world still slept, a lone horse would stand at the edge of the dense forest, its silhouette barely visible against the faint glow of the moonlight. Every night, it waited, unwavering and motionless, as though it anticipated something or someone. When Ranger Jake finally uncovered the reason behind the horse's mysterious vigil, his heart broke into 1,000 pieces. A mysterious visitor. Ranger Jake Lawson had spent most of his adult life working the vast expanse of Pinewood Forest. The forest was his sanctuary, its towering pines and winding trails a second home. Over the years, he'd seen many peculiar things: wildlife migrations, abandoned campsites, even the occasional rogue hiker in need of rescue. But nothing puzzled him more than the horse. Jake first noticed the animal one chilly autumn evening while on his routine patrol. The horse stood at the edge of the forest, just where the tree line gave way to open meadows. Its coat shimmered a deep chestnut under the moonlight, and its mane danced gently in the breeze. At first, Jake thought it belonged to one of the local ranchers, but when he asked around, no one claimed ownership. "No horse of mine is wandering off," one rancher had assured him. The horse's presence became a nightly occurrence. No matter how late Jake finished his patrol or how early he began, the horse was there, always in the same spot, its gaze fixed on the woods as if waiting for something unseen. The unspoken bond. Jake couldn't help but grow curious. One evening, he approached the horse slowly, speaking softly to avoid startling it. "Hey there, buddy," he murmured, extending his hand. The horse turned its head slightly, acknowledging him with a flick of its ear but not moving from its spot. Jake noticed something unusual. The horse wore no saddle, no reins, no markings of ownership. It was wild, or so it seemed. Yet it stood with a calmness that felt almost human, its eyes filled with a sadness Jake couldn't ignore. "Why are you here?" Jake asked aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Of course, there was no answer. Over time, Jake began to leave small offerings for the horse: apples, a bucket of water, or a handful of oats. The horse accepted these gifts but never allowed him to come too close. It stayed rooted at the forest's edge, its posture patient yet tense, as though it were holding on to hope. Chance encounter. One stormy night, Jake's radio crackled to life with a distress call. A hiker had gone missing in the forest, last seen heading into the dense underbrush near the southern trails. The rain was relentless and visibility was poor, but Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed his gear and headed into the woods. As he navigated the treacherous terrain, his mind wandered to the horse. He wondered if it would still be at its usual spot in such dreadful weather. Hours later, drenched and exhausted, Jake found the hiker, cold, scared, but otherwise unharmed. As he guided the man back toward safety, he noticed the horse standing in its familiar place, undeterred by the pouring rain. Jake paused, his heart tightening. "You're waiting for someone, aren't you?" he whispered. The horse's ears perked up at his voice, but it didn't move. The truth begins to unfold. Determined to uncover the mystery, Jake began digging through old records and speaking with longtime residents of the area. That's when he stumbled upon a story that chilled him to his core. About 2 years prior, a man named David had lived in a cabin deep within the forest. David was a recluse, known for his love of horses, particularly his prized mare, Bella. The two were inseparable, often seen galloping through the meadows at sunrise. One winter's day, tragedy struck. David ventured into the woods to gather firewood but never returned. A sudden snowstorm had swept through the area, and despite a massive search effort, his body was never found. Bella, it seemed, had disappeared as well. Jake's heart sank. Could the horse at the forest's edge be Bella, still waiting for her lost owner? A heartbreaking vigil. Jake couldn't shake the thought. He began spending more time near the horse, observing its behavior. One evening, he brought a photograph of David and Bella, borrowed from a neighbor who had known them. Holding the picture in one hand and an apple in the other, Jake approached the horse. "Is this you?" he asked softly, showing the photo. The horse's eyes seemed to glisten as it stepped closer, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the picture. Jake felt a lump in his throat. It was Bella. He was certain of it now. Night after night, Bella had returned to the forest's edge, waiting for David, her loyalty unwavering even as the seasons changed and years passed. The realization brought tears to Jake's eyes. He had always admired the bond between humans and animals, but this was something deeper, an unbreakable connection that defied logic. The final goodbye. Jake knew he couldn't leave Bella to continue her vigil indefinitely. It wasn't fair to her. But how could he convince her to move on? He reached out to a local equine therapist, who suggested bringing Bella to David's old cabin one last time. With great effort, Jake and a few volunteers led Bella into the forest. The horse seemed hesitant at first, her steps tentative, but as they neared the cabin she began to pick up speed, her ears pricked forward. When they arrived, Bella paused at the cabin's threshold, her nostrils flaring as she took in the familiar scents. She walked around the clearing, stopping at spots where Jake guessed she and David had spent time together. Jake stood back, giving her space. He felt like an intruder in a sacred moment. Bella eventually stopped near the cabin's porch, lowering her head and letting out a deep sigh. A new beginning. Jake decided to bring Bella to a nearby sanctuary where she could live out her days in peace. The transition wasn't easy. Bella often looked toward the forest, her eyes distant, but over time, she began to adjust. Jake visited her often, bringing her apples and sharing quiet moments. Though Bella never truly stopped waiting for David, she seemed to find a semblance of peace, her days filled with companionship and care. As for Jake, the experience changed him forever. He had always believed in the resilience of nature, but Bella taught him something new about love and loyalty. Years later, as Jake walked through the sanctuary's fields, he spotted Bella standing near the fence, her chestnut coat gleaming in the sunlight. She turned her head toward him, her eyes soft and knowing. Jake felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you for waiting," he whispered. And in that moment, he realized Bella hadn't just been waiting for David, she had been waiting for someone to understand her story.